Hello everybody and welcome to the first Scriptify video on the YouTube channel. Scriptify is an initiative through which I share the knowledge that I've gathered on building stable process automation code. In this video, we'll be previewing a snippet that I use to test workflows using Studio Pro. This is a somewhat advanced topic, so I will already assume good knowledge of the UiPath automation platform along with basic knowledge of the UiPath test suite for its purposes. As some of you might already know, in the test suite, UiPath offers a default framework where the workflow is split into given, when, and then. Given is needed for setting up your test case. When is where you actually execute the test case itself, and then is where you go ahead to verify it. So in this simple schematic, what you see is, let's say I get rid of this throw. What you're going to have is a setup, execution, and then a verification, which then returns true if it has been verified. But there are a few drawbacks with this setup, and let me list some of them out. Firstly, this workflow does not have a teardown part. So what is teardown? When a particular test case executes either successfully or fails, what has to happen is that the computer must be left in the same state that the robot found it. So for example, if your test case is to navigate to a particular site and check something, once your test case is done, either successfully or unsuccessfully, what is supposed to happen is that this browser window has to be closed. Second drawback here is that there's no means to fail the test if the workflow encounters an unexpected error. So let me simulate an error. I have simulated a simple error here. As you can see in the properties, it just says test exception. And when I run this file, the exception is thrown, but the test hasn't failed. As you can see in the output panel here, I don't have a notification that the test has failed. So that's one more drawback. And the third drawback is that there is no means to distinguish between positive and negative cases. Through your tests, you expect certain things to execute, but you also test what happens if they don't execute successfully. If you're going to test a login to a website, you're also going to test what happens if you don't enter the right credentials. So there is also no mechanism to do that with this simplistic setup. To overcome some of these obstacles, this is what I propose that we can use as an alternative. It's a simple snippet. I'm going to be including this in UiPath Go, and I'll link to this. I'll link to the site where you can download this and use it for your own purposes, but it's also simple enough for you to build it on your own. What is more important is the principles that I'm going to go through. It comprises of 4 parts rather than 3. It has a setup, an execute, a verify, and a teardown. And the teardown is actually in the finally block, and that's why you can't see it readily, but it totally has these 4 blocks. So let me go through them again. There's the setup, there's the execute, there's the verify, and there's the teardown. The setup does everything necessary for making sure that your workflow can be executed or setting up your test case. The execute is where the workflow is actually executed. The verify gives you some feedback on whether the test was successful or not. And you must have also noticed that there's a try catch that's going right around the setup, the execute, and the verify. And what this try catch does is, in case there's an error encountered during execution, what it does is it logs the exception message, but also always ensures that your test case fails. So for instance, if I were to have simulated the error here, now I not only have the error message here, but I also have a verification failed, which means, as expected, in case the test case is not successful or it encounters an unexpected error, that also means the test case has failed. Furthermore, what you can do in case of a negative case, that is, if you don't want something to happen, is you can include a try catch inside the execute flow. And in the catch, you can, derive the exception. And based on how the exception is given, you can also include a further check. I know I'm getting a little ahead of myself here. And we'll look at the negative case using an example. So I've already outlined some of the advantages that come with this approach, but what can make it even clearer is if I give you an example, or a trivial example in this case, of how you can see this in action. All right, so here's a simple example. What I'm going to do is I'm going to test a workflow which clears a particular folder. So if you give this workflow a folder path, it'll ensure that all the files within this folder are deleted. And yeah, I know this is a trivial example, but it's useful for our illustration here. As you can see, there's the setup, the execute, the verify, and also the teardown. Let's go into each of these parts and look at what they do. In the setup part, what you do is you actually fill up this test folder. You fill it up with a few files, a few dummy files that can serve for the workflow to go ahead and delete later. So that is what is included in the setup. I'm also logging the start of the test here. In the execute part, you can see that I'm giving the path to the folder as an input here. Apart from that, I don't have anything else here. And in the verify, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into this folder path and ensure that it doesn't have any files by using this command and checking that if the count of these files is 0. What happens in the teardown? Well, if the folder path actually exists, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through each of these files and delete them. Just to ensure that the next test run, all the files are deleted and it already starts off with a clean slate. So there you can see a setup, execute, verify, and teardown. And if I were to make this run, it executes pretty neatly. What if I mess around with my input file a little bit? So in this case, the workflow is going to encounter an error and the test should fail. Let's see if that happens. There you go. The error has been encountered here and the test has also failed. So far, so good. So now let us quickly preview what happens if you're testing a negative test case. In the sense, you are testing what happens if the workflow is supposed to, if something is supposed to go wrong with the workflow. In this case, what I'm testing is with the same clear folder workflow, I'm testing what happens if the folder path that is given to the workflow is not valid. With the setup is pretty similar. So I fill the folder with some dummy files. And with the execution is also pretty much unchanged, except for this try catch block, which is going around the execution. And what you can see here is this is because I'm expecting an error and it's supposed to go to the exception stage. Once the exception is caught here, what I do is I read the exception message, and in my verify, I check if the right exception message has been thrown, which is input folder does not exist in this case. And as usual, I also have the teardown here, which is deleting the files in the folder that corresponds to this input path. And in my input folder path, I have an imaginary folder path. So this does not exist. Let's see what happens when I execute this. There you go. It has received the error message, but later it has also passed the verification because in this case, the error was expected and it has been handled in the catch stage. That is all for this video. As I mentioned, I'll upload the snippet to UiPath Go and link it below in the video's description so that you can download it and use it. If you find this video useful, please hit the subscribe button to keep up with my other updates on this channel. Until next time, I wish you happy and stable automation.